The morning mist clung to the training ground like a shroud of doubt. 12 targets stood at impossible distances, their silhouettes barely visible through the haze. The men around her whispered behind calloused hands, their voices carrying the familiar sting of dismissal she had grown accustomed to over the years. "She'll be lucky to hit 3, muttered Sergeant Rodriguez, his weathered face creased with skepticism. "My money says she quits before the 5th shot," added Corporal Jenkins, adjusting his cap with the confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong about such things. But they didn't know Elena Vasquez. They didn't know about the nights she spent perfecting her breathing technique in her childhood bedroom, using a broken air rifle her grandfather had given her. They didn't know about the promise she made over her father's grave, or the fire that burned in her chest every time someone told her she didn't belong. What happened next would not only silence every doubter in that field, but would rewrite the record books and change the course of military history forever. This is the story of how a woman who was never supposed to succeed became the most feared sniper in her nation's history, and how one perfect morning proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the rifle, it's the person behind it who has been underestimated their entire life. Elena Vasquez never planned to become a soldier, much less a sniper. Growing up in the dusty border town of San Miguel, she spent her childhood helping her mother run their small grocery store while her father worked double shifts at the local factory. The sound of gunfire was as common as church bells in their neighborhood, but it came from the wrong side of the law. Drug cartels controlled the streets after dark, and honest families like the Vasquez learned to keep their heads down and their doors locked. Her father, Miguel, had been different from other men in the neighborhood. While most fathers taught their sons to fight and their daughters to hide, Miguel taught Elena to observe. He would sit with her on their small porch in the evenings, pointing out details others missed. Garcia walked differently when her arthritis was acting up. How young Pablo always kicked the same loose stone when he was nervous. The subtle changes in people's voices when they were lying. "The world speaks to those who know how to listen, mija," he would tell her, his voice soft but serious. "Most people see only what's in front of them. But if you learn to truly see, to truly hear, you'll understand things others cannot." Elena absorbed these lessons without knowing they would one day save her life and the lives of countless others. She learned to read the wind by watching how it moved through the mesquite trees. She could predict rain by the way stray dogs behaved hours before the first clouds appeared. Her friends thought she was strange, always noticing things that seemed unimportant. When Elena was 15, everything changed. Her father was walking home from his factory job when he witnessed a drug deal gone wrong. 3 men lay dead in the street, and Miguel Vasquez saw the faces of the killers clearly in the streetlight. He did what he thought was right, what his conscience demanded. He went to the police and gave a full statement, identifying the shooters by name. The cartel's response was swift and brutal. They didn't just kill Miguel Vasquez, they made an example of him. Elena found her father's body hanging from the old oak tree in their backyard, a message spray-painted on their garden wall. "This is what happens to those who talk." The funeral was small. Most neighbors were too afraid to attend, worried that showing support for the Vasquez family would mark them for similar treatment. Elena's mother, Maria, barely spoke for weeks afterward. She moved through their home like a ghost, mechanically restocking shelves and counting money, while her eyes remained empty and distant. Elena felt something different growing inside her. It wasn't just grief or anger, though both emotions burned in her chest. It was a cold, calculating fury that seemed to crystallize with each passing day. She began to understand that in their world, being right wasn't enough. Being good wasn't enough. You had to be strong, and you had to be smart, and you had to be willing to do whatever it took to protect the people you loved. 3 months after her father's death, Elena made a decision that would change the trajectory of her entire life. She walked into the military recruitment office in the city center, her shoulders straight and her jaw set with determination that surprised even herself. Captain Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork and frowned. He was used to desperate young men seeking escape from poverty or gang life, but a 17-year-old girl was unusual. Elena was small for her age, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighing no more than 110 pounds. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand. "You lost, young lady?" Rodriguez asked, not unkindly, but with obvious confusion. "No, sir," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I want to enlist." Rodriguez set down his pen and studied her more carefully. There was something in her eyes that caught his attention, intensity that seemed older than her years. But military regulations were clear. "You need parental consent," he explained, "and you need to be 18. Elena had anticipated this obstacle. She pulled an envelope from her backpack and placed it on his desk. Inside were her birth certificate, showing she had turned 18 just 2 weeks earlier, and a notarized letter from her mother giving permission for her to enlist. What the captain didn't know was that Elena had spent weeks learning to forge her mother's signature, practicing until she could reproduce it perfectly, even under stress. She had also paid a corrupt clerk at the records office to alter her birth certificate, aging herself up by several months. Her mother knew nothing about any of this. Rodriguez examined the documents carefully. Everything appeared to be in order, though something about the situation bothered him. He had seen enough desperate people to recognize the signs, and this girl radiated a kind of desperate determination that worried him.
"Why do you want to join the military?" he asked, leaning back in his chair.
Elena had prepared for this question too. She couldn't tell him about her father, about the rage that consumed her dreams and made her wake up with clenched fists. She couldn't explain how she lay awake at night imagining different ways to make the cartel members pay for what they had done. "I want to serve my country," she said instead. "I want to make a difference." It was a standard answer, one Rodriguez heard from almost every recruit. But the way Elena said it, with such quiet conviction, made him believe she meant it. Against his better judgment, he began processing her paperwork. The physical fitness test nearly ended Elena's military career before it began. She could run the required distance, barely, but she struggled with push-ups and pull-ups. The drill sergeant, a mountain of a man named Sergeant First Class Morrison, made his opinion clear. "Girl, you couldn't fight your way out of a paper bag," he announced to the assembled group of new recruits. "What makes you think you can handle military training?" Elena said nothing, but she filed away the humiliation and added it to her growing collection of motivations. That night, while other recruits slept, she did push-ups in the bathroom until her arms shook. She ran laps around the barracks building until her lungs burned. She would not be the weakest link. Basic training was a nightmare that lasted 12 weeks. Elena was the only woman in her platoon, and some of the men seemed to take personal offense at her presence. They played pranks designed to drive her away. They questioned her strength, her commitment, and her sanity for thinking she belonged among soldiers. But Elena had advantages they didn't recognize. Her father's lessons and observations served her well. She learned to anticipate the drill sergeant's moods and adjust her behavior accordingly. She studied the other recruits, identifying who would be allies and who would be problems. Most importantly, she discovered she had a natural gift for marksmanship. The first time Elena held a rifle, something clicked. The weight felt right in her hands, the balance was perfect. When she looked through the sights, the world seemed to slow down and become clearer. Her breathing naturally synchronized with her heartbeat, and she found she could control both with remarkable precision. Her first shot at the practice range was a bullseye. The drill sergeant assumed it was luck. Her second shot was also a bullseye. By her fifth consecutive perfect shot, she had the attention of everyone on the range. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Morrison, lowering his binoculars. "Looks like the little lady can shoot." Elena's accuracy became legendary within her training battalion. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 200 yards, she was consistently scoring perfect shots at 400 yards. The instructors began to take notice, whispering among themselves about the quiet girl who seemed to have been born with a rifle in her hands. But Elena's real talent wasn't just accuracy. It was her ability to remain perfectly calm under pressure. During combat simulations, while other soldiers panicked or made hasty decisions, Elena moved with calculated precision. She processed information quickly, identified threats and opportunities, and executed her plans with mechanical efficiency. Her fellow recruits began to see her differently. The jokes and harassment gradually stopped as they realized Elena wasn't going anywhere. She had proven herself capable of matching or exceeding their performance in nearly every area. More importantly, they began to recognize that having Elena on their team improved their chances of success in training exercises. By the end of basic training, Elena had earned the grudging respect of most of her platoon. She graduated third in her class overall and first in marksmanship. But more than test scores or awards, she had discovered something about herself that would define the rest of her life. Elena Vasquez had found her calling. She was born to be a sniper. When graduation day arrived, Elena's mother made the long bus journey to attend the ceremony. Maria Vasquez had aged years in the month since her husband's death, her black hair now streaked with gray, and her hands constantly trembling. She watched her daughter receive her assignments with a mixture of pride and fear. After the ceremony, they sat together on a bench outside the base, neither speaking for several minutes. Finally, Maria broke the silence. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Elena felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to store them away where they couldn't interfere with her focus. But sitting next to her mother, seeing the pain that still lived in her eyes, Elena felt something crack inside her carefully constructed emotional armor. "I'm going to make them pay, Mama," she whispered, so quietly that her mother almost couldn't hear her. Maria turned to look at her daughter, seeing something in Elena's face that frightened her. This wasn't the sweet girl who used to help her stock shelves and count inventory. This was someone harder, colder, more dangerous. "The dead don't come back, Mija," Maria said gently. "Don't let revenge consume your life the way grief has consumed mine." But Elena wasn't listening anymore. She was watching a group of new recruits struggling through their first day of training, remembering her own first day and how certain everyone had been that she would fail. She thought about her father's lessons in observation, about learning to see what others missed. What Elena saw, sitting there in the afternoon sun, was her future stretching out before her like a road leading toward justice. She didn't know yet about the record she would break or the enemies who would learn to fear her name. She didn't know about the lives she would save or the impossible shots she would make. All she knew was that she had found her weapon and she was ready to use it. Elena's exceptional performance in basic training earned her a coveted spot in advanced marksmanship school. But it also brought new challenges that tested her resolve in ways she had never imagined. The Specialized Infantry Training Center was located high in the mountains, where thin air and extreme weather conditions would push even the most skilled soldiers to their limits. The first person Elena met at the new facility was Master Sergeant Patricia Wells, a woman who had served 3 combat tours and whose reputation preceded her like a storm front. Wells was everything Elena hoped to become: tough, respected, and absolutely deadly with a rifle. She was also skeptical of any soldier who arrived with too much fanfare. "So you're the girl everyone's talking about," Wells said, looking Elena up and down with obvious disappointment. "They say you can shoot." "We'll see about that." The advanced program was designed to weed out all but the most exceptional marksmen. Of the 40 soldiers who began the course, only 12 would graduate. The training was relentless, beginning before dawn and continuing long after sunset. Students learned not just shooting, but camouflage, infiltration, surveillance, and most importantly, the mental discipline required to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot. Elena threw herself into the training with single-minded determination. While other students complained about the cold mountain mornings or the repetitive nature of the exercises, she absorbed every lesson like a dry sponge soaking up water. She studied trajectory calculations until she could perform them in her head. She practiced controlling her breathing until she could slow her heart rate at will, but it was the psychological training that proved most challenging. Instructor after instructor hammered home the same point. A sniper's job was to kill human beings from a distance, often people who would never see them coming. It required a particular kind of mental toughness that not everyone possessed. "Some of you think this is about being a good shot," announced Colonel James Harrison during one of his lectures. "You're wrong. Any decent soldier can learn to hit a target. A sniper has to be willing to take a human life without hesitation, then live with that decision for the rest of their career. Not everyone can do that." Elena listened to these warnings with outward calm, but internally she was wrestling with questions she hadn't expected. Her anger over her father's death had carried her this far, but was that enough? Could she really look through a scope at another human being and pull the trigger? The answer came during a training exercise in her 8th week of the program. Elena was positioned on a rocky outcrop, her rifle trained on a mock enemy position nearly 1,000 yards away. The exercise was designed to test her ability to remain concealed while observing enemy movements. She had been lying motionless for 6 hours when something unexpected happened. Through her scope, Elena saw one of the role-playing enemy soldiers remove his helmet and run his hand through his hair. For just a moment, his profile was clearly visible, and Elena felt her breath catch. The soldier looked exactly like Carlos Mendez, one of the men who had killed her father. It wasn't him, of course. Carlos was probably still running drugs in San Miguel, confident that he would never face consequences for his crimes. But the resemblance triggered something primal in Elena. Her finger moved to the trigger, and for several seconds she imagined what it would feel like to make the shot. The weight of the trigger under her finger, the kick of the rifle against her shoulder, the satisfaction of watching her target fall. The intensity of her reaction frightened her. This was supposed to be just an exercise, but Elena found herself breathing hard and sweating despite the cold mountain air. She had discovered something dark inside herself, something that wanted to kill with a hunger that went beyond duty or justice. That night, Elena lay awake in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Around her, other students slept peacefully, but she couldn't quiet the storm in her mind. Was she becoming the kind of person her father would have wanted her to be? Or was she turning into something else entirely? Her crisis of confidence couldn't have come at a worse time. The program was entering its most difficult phase, where students would be tested under conditions designed to simulate actual combat stress. Elena's shooting, which had been flawless for weeks, suddenly became inconsistent. She missed shots she should have made easily. Her hands shook at crucial moments. Master Sergeant Wells noticed the change immediately. After Elena failed to hit 3 consecutive targets during the live-fire exercise, Wells called her aside for a private conversation. "What's going on, Vasquez?" Wells demanded. "2 weeks ago, you were the best shot in this program.
Now you're shooting like a recruit who's never held a rifle."
Elena wanted to explain, but she didn't have words for what she was experiencing. How could she tell her instructor that she was afraid of how much she wanted to kill someone?
How could she admit that her motivation for becoming a sniper might not be as pure as everyone believed? "I don't know, Sergeant," she said instead. "I guess I'm just having an off week." Wells studied Elena's face for several long moments. She had seen this before with other students. The moment when the reality of their chosen profession truly sank in. Some soldiers pushed through this crisis and emerged stronger. Others washed out, unable to reconcile their training with their conscience. "Let me tell you something, Vasquez," Wells said finally. "Every good soldier goes through this. The moment when you realize that what we're training to do isn't a game or a sport, it's about life and death, and sometimes that scares people." Elena nodded, grateful that someone understood even a small part of what she was feeling. "But here's the thing," Wells continued. "Fear isn't your enemy. Doubt isn't your enemy. The enemy is the person who's trying to kill you or the people you're protecting. Your job isn't to feel good about what you're doing. Your job is to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done." The conversation helped, but Elena's struggles continued. She began to fall behind other students in key areas of training. Her instructors started whispering among themselves, wondering if the girl who had shown such promise was going to flame out spectacularly. The turning point came during a survival exercise in the 10th week of training. Students were dropped in the wilderness with minimal equipment and told to make their way to a checkpoint 15 miles away while avoiding enemy patrols. It was designed to test everything they had learned about stealth, navigation, and mental toughness. Elena was moving through dense forest in the early morning hours when she heard voices ahead. Through the trees, she could see 2 instructors playing the role of enemy soldiers, positioned exactly along the route she needed to take to reach her objective. There was no way around them without adding hours to her journey, and she was already behind schedule. She settled into a concealed position and studied the situation through her scope. Both instructors were armed with paintball guns and wearing protective gear. The exercise rules were clear. If she was spotted, she would be eliminated from the course. But if she could eliminate both targets without being detected, she could continue. Elena lined up her first shot, a clean hit to the instructor's center mass. Her paintball round struck perfectly, marking him as eliminated. The second instructor spun around, trying to locate the source of the shot, but Elena had already shifted positions. Her second shot took him cleanly as well. What surprised Elena wasn't her accuracy, which had returned with startling clarity. It was how calm she felt during the engagement. The doubt and internal conflict that had plagued her for weeks simply vanished when she had a clear mission and defined targets. She realized that her struggle hadn't been about her ability to kill, but about her reasons for wanting to do so. The distinction was crucial. A good sniper killed when necessary to complete a mission or protect innocent lives. A good sniper didn't kill for personal satisfaction or revenge. Elena understood now that she needed to separate her desire for justice from her professional duties as a soldier. Her performance improved dramatically over the final weeks of training. She graduated second in her class, behind only a Marine Corps veteran who was already an experienced sniper seeking additional certification. More importantly, she had learned to control the darkness inside herself, to channel her anger into professional competence rather than personal vendetta. On graduation day, Master Sergeant Wells pulled Elena aside once more. This time, her expression was one of respect rather than skepticism. "You almost washed out," Wells said bluntly. "For a while there, I thought we were going to lose you. What changed your mind?" Elena asked. "You figured out the difference between being a killer and being a soldier," Wells replied. "A lot of people never learn that distinction. The fact that you wrestled with it, that it bothered you, tells me you're going to be one of the good ones." Elena's first assignment was to a forward operating base in a region torn by civil conflict. The area was controlled by various militia groups, who preyed on civilian populations and attacked government forces with increasing boldness. Her unit's mission was to provide security for humanitarian aid convoys and to neutralize high-value targets when possible. The base commander was Colonel Maria Santos, a woman who had risen through the ranks during some of the military's most challenging operations. Santos had specifically requested Elena for her unit after reviewing her training records and psychological evaluations. "I've heard good things about you, Vasquez," Santos said during Elena's initial briefing, "but training is different from the real thing. Out here, when you squeeze that trigger, people don't get back up. Are you ready for that?" Elena thought about her father, about the men who had killed him, and walked away without consequences. She thought about the families in this region who lived in fear because violent men faced no opposition. She thought about Master Sergeant Wells and the lesson about being a soldier rather than a killer. "Yes, ma'am," she answered with quiet confidence. "I'm ready." What Elena didn't know was that her reputation had already begun to spread beyond the training facilities. Military intelligence units had taken note of her exceptional scores and psychological profile. Her combination of technical skill and mental toughness was exactly what they needed for a classified operation that was being planned at the highest levels of command. But first, Elena would need to prove herself in actual combat conditions. She would need to show that her training translated to real-world effectiveness. She would need to demonstrate that she could perform under the kind of pressure that no training exercise could truly simulate. The opportunity would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would establish Elena Vasquez as one of the most promising snipers in military history. But it would also force her to confront the reality that in war, even the most carefully planned operations can go catastrophically wrong. Elena's first real mission came just 3 weeks into her deployment. Intelligence reports indicated that a notorious militia leader named Viktor Kozlov was planning to attack a refugee camp housing over 2,000 civilians. Kozlov had earned his reputation through brutal tactics, including the systematic execution of anyone who opposed his forces or provided information to government troops. The mission briefing took place in a sweltering concrete bunker that served as the base's command center. Colonel Santos stood before a map covered with red pins marking recent attacks, her face grim as she outlined the intelligence they had received. "Kozlov is scheduled to meet with his lieutenants tomorrow morning at an abandoned factory complex 12 kilometers north of here," Santos explained. "This represents our best opportunity to eliminate him before he can launch his assault on the refugee camp." Elena studied the satellite photographs of the target area. The factory was surrounded by open ground that would make approach difficult, but there were several elevated positions that could provide adequate fields of fire. She calculated distances and angles automatically, her training taking over as she assessed the tactical situation. "What's the range from the nearest concealed position?" asked Sergeant Martinez, the spotter who would be accompanying Elena on the mission. "Approximately 800 meters," Santos replied. "Well within your capabilities based on your training records, Vasquez." Elena nodded, but privately she felt the familiar flutter of nerves that came before any important test. 800 meters was a long shot even under ideal conditions, and combat rarely provided ideal conditions. Wind, temperature, humidity, and stress could all affect accuracy at that distance. The mission team consisted of Elena, Martinez, and 4 additional soldiers who would provide security during the operation. They would move into position under cover of darkness and wait for Kozlov to arrive at the meeting. If everything went according to plan, Elena would have one shot to eliminate the target before the team would need to extract quickly to avoid the inevitable response from Kozlov's forces. Elena spent the afternoon before the mission checking and rechecking her equipment. She field-stripped her rifle completely, cleaning each component until it gleamed. She calculated ballistic charts for the expected weather conditions. She practiced her breathing exercises until she could control her heart rate with mechanical precision. But despite her technical preparations, Elena found herself thinking about the human aspect of what she was about to do. Viktor Kozlov was undoubtedly a dangerous man who had caused immense suffering, but he was still a human being with a life and presumably people who cared about him. In a few hours, Elena would end that life with a single bullet. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than her rifle as the team prepared to depart. Elena had killed before during training exercises, but always with paintballs or blanks. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, when she pulled the trigger, someone would die. The team moved out at midnight, traveling cross-country to avoid roads and settlements where they might encounter militia patrols. Elena carried her rifle and a light pack containing ammunition, water, and emergency supplies. The night was humid and moonless, perfect for concealment but challenging for navigation. Martinez proved to be an excellent spotter, guiding the team through the darkness with quiet confidence. He was a veteran of multiple deployments and had worked with several snipers over the years. He had specifically volunteered to work with Elena, curious to see if her reputation was justified.
First time,
Martinez whispered as they settled into their final position, a rocky outcrop that provided clear lines of sight to the factory complex below.
Yes,
Elena admitted, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. Martinez nodded approvingly. Better to be honest about it. I've worked with guys who claimed to be veterans when they weren't. Usually ended badly. They had arrived with hours to spare before the scheduled meeting. Elena used the time to study the target area through her scope, memorizing details that might become important later. She identified potential escape routes, noted wind patterns by watching how debris moved in the breeze, and calculated precise ranges to multiple points around the factory. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Elena of sunrises over her childhood home in San Miguel. She pushed away the memory and focused on her breathing, settling into the meditative state that had become second nature during her training. At precisely 7:30 in the morning, a convoy of 3 vehicles arrived at the factory. Elena watched through her scope as armed men emerged and took positions around the perimeter. They moved with military precision, suggesting these were experienced fighters rather than the undisciplined militia members she had expected. Target vehicles arriving, Martinez reported quietly into his radio, updating the command center on their situation. Elena tracked the movements below, waiting for Kozlov to reveal himself. According to intelligence reports, he was a tall man with distinctive grey hair and a prominent scar across his left cheek. He typically wore military fatigues and carried an ornate pistol that had belonged to his grandfather. Several minutes passed before Elena saw him. Kozlov emerged from the middle vehicle, immediately recognizable from his physical description and the deference shown by his subordinates. He moved with the confidence of a man who had survived numerous attempts on his life and believed himself untouchable. Elena aligned her scope's crosshairs with Kozlov's center mass, adjusting for the estimated wind speed and the slight downward angle of her shot. At 800 meters, she would need to account for bullet drop and atmospheric conditions. She had practiced similar shots hundreds of times, but never with a human target. Target acquired, she whispered to Martinez. Confirmed, Martinez replied, studying Kozlov through his own optics. Wind is light and variable, maybe 3 knots from the northwest. Elena made minute adjustments to her aim, settling the crosshairs just above Kozlov's heart. She began her breathing cycle, slowly exhaling as her finger moved to the trigger. Everything around her seemed to fade away until there was only the target, the rifle, and the connection between them. She was applying pressure to the trigger when Kozlov suddenly moved. Instead of remaining stationary as he had for the past several minutes, he turned and walked toward the factory entrance. Elena followed him with her scope, waiting for him to stop again and present a stable target. But Kozlov didn't stop. He disappeared into the building, leaving Elena with no shot and a rapidly closing window of opportunity. The meeting was scheduled to last only 30 minutes, after which Kozlov would presumably return to his vehicle and leave the area. Target is inside the structure, Elena reported, frustration evident in her voice despite her professional training. Maintain position, came the response from command. He'll have to come out eventually. 25 minutes passed with no sign of movement from inside the factory. Elena remained perfectly still, her eye to the scope and her finger on the trigger, ready to take the shot the moment Kozlov reappeared. But the waiting was more stressful than she had anticipated. During training, targets had appeared on schedule and remained visible for predetermined amounts of time. Real combat operations were messier and less predictable. Finally, movement near the factory entrance caught Elena's attention. But, instead of Kozlov, she saw one of his lieutenants emerge and speak urgently to the guards outside. Within moments, the entire security perimeter was moving, their relaxed postures suddenly alert and focused. Something's wrong, Martinez observed, tracking the activity below through his spotting scope. They look like they've been compromised. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. If Kozlov's forces knew about the mission, the entire team was in immediate danger. Their position, while excellent for shooting, would be difficult to defend if they came under attack from multiple directions. The radio crackled with urgent communication from the command center. Sniper team, be advised, we're receiving reports of militia forces moving toward your position. You may have been compromised. Before Elena could respond, she saw armed men emerging from concealed positions around the factory. They had been there all along, waiting in ambush for exactly this kind of operation. The intelligence that had seemed so reliable had actually been bait in a carefully constructed trap. We need to move now, Martinez said urgently, already beginning to pack his equipment. Elena kept her eye on the factory entrance, hoping for one clear shot at Kozlov before they were forced to retreat. If she could complete the mission, the risk they had taken would be worthwhile. If they left empty-handed, Kozlov would be free to proceed with his attack on the refugee camp. That's when she saw him. Kozlov appeared in the factory doorway, no longer the casual figure she had observed earlier. He was now wearing body armor and carrying an assault rifle, clearly aware that enemy forces were in the area. But he was visible, and at 800 meters, body armor wouldn't stop a rifle. Elena didn't have time for her usual breathing routine or careful adjustments. She aligned her crosshairs with the small portion of Kozlov's torso that remained unprotected and squeezed the trigger in one smooth motion. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through her scope, Elena saw Kozlov stumble and fall backward into the factory entrance. She had hit him, but she couldn't tell if the wound was fatal or merely incapacitating. "Target down," she reported, already beginning to pack her rifle for the retreat. "Confirmed hit," Martinez added, collapsing his spotting scope with practiced efficiency. The team moved quickly from their position, following predetermined escape routes, while militia forces below began a systematic search of the surrounding area. Elena felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty as they retreated. She had taken her first shot in combat, but the circumstances had been far from ideal. Over the following hours, as the team made their way back to base, Elena learned the outcome of her shot. Radio intercepts confirmed that Kozlov had been critically wounded and evacuated for medical treatment. He would survive, but his injuries would keep him out of action for months. The planned attack on the refugee camp had been cancelled. Colonel Santos debriefed Elena personally upon the team's return to base. The mission was being classified as a partial success, significant enough to justify the risk, but incomplete enough to leave questions about future operations. "How do you feel about your performance?" Santos asked, studying Elena's face for signs of stress or psychological impact.
Elena considered the question carefully.
She felt proud of making a difficult shot under pressure, but frustrated that the target had survived. She felt relief that her team had escaped without casualties, but concern about how their intelligence had been compromised. "I think I learned that real missions are more complicated than training exercises," she answered finally. Santos nodded approvingly. "That's a mature assessment. The fact that you're thinking about these complexities rather than just celebrating the hit tells me you understand what this job really involves." But Elena's first taste of combat had revealed something troubling about the intelligence networks they relied upon. Either their sources had been compromised, or someone within the military structure was providing information to enemy forces. The implications of either possibility were disturbing, and would require careful investigation. What Elena didn't know was that her shot, while not fatal, had achieved something beyond the immediate tactical objectives. Word of the attack on Kozlov spread quickly through militia networks, along with descriptions of the impossible accuracy demonstrated by government forces. For the first time, these groups were facing a sniper capable of threatening their leadership from distances they had previously considered safe. The psychological impact of Elena's emerging reputation would prove to be as valuable as her technical skills, but it would also make her a priority target for enemy forces who understood that eliminating exceptional snipers was crucial to their own survival. Elena's war was just beginning, and both sides were starting to take notice of the quiet young woman who could kill from distances that seemed almost supernatural. The morning that would make Elena Vasquez a legend began like any other training day at the Advanced Combat Assessment Center. She had returned from her classified international mission 3 weeks earlier, her operational details sealed in files that would remain classified for decades. But her performance had been extraordinary enough to warrant assignment to the military's most elite sniper unit, where only the most exceptional marksmen were invited to serve. The assessment center was where military snipers from around the world came to test themselves against the most challenging scenarios the training staff could devise. It was part competition, part research facility, and part proving ground for new techniques and equipment. Elena had been selected to participate in a comprehensive evaluation that would establish new benchmarks for sniper capability. General Patricia Hayes, the facility's commanding officer, had been following Elena's career with intense interest. Hayes herself was a former sniper who had transitioned into training and development, working to improve the military's long-range precision capabilities. She had specifically requested Elena for this evaluation after reviewing classified reports of her international operations. "Today's assessment is different from anything we've done before," Hayes explained during the pre-dawn briefing. "We're testing the absolute limits of human marksmanship under combat conditions. The scenarios will be more challenging than anything you've encountered, and the stakes are higher than just personal performance." Elena sat with 11 other snipers from various military units, each one selected for their exceptional abilities and combat experience. She recognized several faces from her training days, but others were strangers with reputations that preceded them like legends. These were the best of the best, gathered to push the boundaries of what was considered possible. The assessment would consist of multiple stages, each one designed to test different aspects of sniper capability: long-range accuracy, rapid target engagement, shooting under stress, environmental adaptation, and tactical decision-making would all be evaluated through scenarios that simulated real combat conditions.
But what none of the participants knew was that the assessment was being observed by military leaders and defense contractors who were developing next-generation weapon systems.
Elena's performance would influence decisions about equipment procurement and training standards that would affect thousands of future soldiers.
The first stage took place on a traditional shooting range, but with targets placed at distances that challenged the effective range of their rifles. Elena's assigned targets were positioned at 800, 1,000, 1,200, and 1,400 meters respectively, requiring her to account for factors like bullet drop, wind drift, and atmospheric pressure that could throw off even the most experienced marksman. She approached the first target methodically, using techniques she had refined through months of combat experience. Her breathing was controlled, her heart rate steady, her mind focused entirely on the connection between her rifle and the distant target. The shot was clean, striking the center of the bullseye with precision that drew approving nods from the observing instructors. The second target required adjustment for increased wind speed and a slightly different atmospheric pressure. Elena made her calculations automatically, her training and experience combining to provide solutions faster than conscious thought could process. Another perfect hit. By the time Elena engaged her fourth target at 1,400 meters, she had attracted the attention of everyone on the range. Shooting accurately at that distance required skills that bordered on the supernatural, combining technical knowledge with intuitive understanding of ballistics that few people ever developed. Her fourth shot struck the target's center ring, officially completing the first stage with a perfect score. Around her, other snipers were struggling with targets at much shorter distances, their shots scattered around the target zones despite their considerable skill. The second stage moved to a more complex environment that simulated urban combat conditions. Elena found herself positioned on a building rooftop, engaging targets that appeared at various distances and angles throughout a mock city constructed specifically for training purposes. This stage tested not just accuracy, but speed and decision-making under pressure. Targets would appear for only seconds at a time, requiring Elena to identify, range, and engage them before they disappeared. Some targets were marked as hostiles, others as civilians, forcing split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Elena's performance in the urban simulation was flawless. She engaged 12 targets in rapid succession, never missing and never hesitating when civilian figures appeared in her field of fire. Her ability to process complex visual information quickly while maintaining perfect shooting technique was unlike anything the instructors had seen before. But it was the third stage that would establish Elena's place in military history. The scenario was designed to test absolute maximum capability under the most stressful conditions possible. Elena would be required to engage multiple targets at extreme ranges while under simulated enemy fire, with time pressures that would challenge her ability to maintain accuracy under stress. 12 targets were positioned at distances ranging from 600 to 1,200 meters, each one requiring a different ballistic solution and shooting position. Elena would have exactly 30 minutes to engage all targets, with penalties for misses that would eliminate her from competition if she failed to maintain near-perfect accuracy. The added challenge was that instructors would be firing blank ammunition near her position. To simulate the stress of being under enemy fire, smoke machines would reduce visibility, and loudspeakers would broadcast the sounds of combat to create maximum psychological pressure. Elena took her position as the simulation began. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the air around her, while smoke drifted across her field of fire in patterns that constantly changed her visibility of distant targets. This was chaos, the kind of environment where even experienced soldiers could become overwhelmed and make fatal mistakes. But for Elena, the chaos seemed to trigger something deeper than her training. The stress and confusion that would have degraded other shooters' performance actually seemed to enhance her focus. Her breathing became more controlled, her movements more precise, her decision-making faster and more certain. Her first shot rang out just 90 seconds into the exercise, striking a target at 800 meters that was barely visible through the artificial smoke. Her second shot followed 20 seconds later, eliminating a target at 1,000 meters with casual precision. As Elena worked her way through the target array, something remarkable became apparent to the observers. She wasn't just hitting the targets, she was hitting them faster than anyone had thought possible while maintaining perfect accuracy. Her shots came with metronomic regularity, each one finding its mark despite conditions that should have made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Target after target fell to Elena's rifle, each shot demonstrating not just exceptional marksmanship, but an almost supernatural ability to process complex information under stress. She was calculating range wind and ballistic drop while moving between shooting positions, all while ignoring the simulated combat conditions that surrounded her. The instructors began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Elena's performance was exceeding not just their expectations, but their understanding of what human beings were capable of achieving under such conditions. With 15 minutes remaining in the exercise, Elena had successfully engaged 10 of the 12 targets. The final 2 targets were positioned at the maximum range of her rifle, over 1,200 meters distant and partially concealed behind obstacles that made them extremely difficult to identify, let alone hit. Elena located the 11th target through careful observation, identifying it by the slight reflection of sunlight off what was probably a scope or binoculars. The shot was the most difficult she had ever attempted, requiring her to account for multiple variables while shooting through a gap in the obstacles that was barely wider than her bullet. The shot was perfect. At a distance of 1,250 meters, under combat stress conditions, through a narrow opening, Elena's bullet found its target with precision that left the observing officers speechless. The 12th and final target was even more challenging. Positioned at maximum range and almost completely concealed, it would require Elena to make assumptions about its exact location based on minimal visual information. Most marksmen would have considered the shot impossible under such conditions. Elena studied the target area through her scope for several minutes, using techniques her father had taught her about observation and patience. Finally, she identified what she believed was the target's location, a tiny irregularity in the landscape that might have been camouflaged equipment. Her final shot was fired with 10 minutes remaining in the exercise. Through her scope, Elena watched her bullet's impact and saw the unmistakable sign of a successful hit. She had completed what would later be classified as the most challenging sniper assessment ever conducted by the military. The silence that followed Elena's final shot was broken only by the gradual cessation of the simulated combat sounds. Instructors emerged from concealed positions to verify her results, but the electronic scoring system had already confirmed what everyone suspected. Elena Vasquez had achieved a perfect score on an assessment that had been designed to challenge the absolute limits of human capability. She had engaged 12 targets at extreme ranges under maximum stress conditions in record time, without a single miss or hesitation. General Hayes approached Elena as she was clearing her rifle, her expression a mixture of respect and amazement. "In 30 years of military service, I have never seen anything like what you just accomplished," Hayes said quietly. "You didn't just break the existing record. You shattered it so completely that we're going to have to redesign our entire assessment program." The implications of Elena's performance extended far beyond personal achievement. Her demonstration of what was possible under extreme conditions would influence training programs, equipment development, and tactical doctrines for decades to come. She had proven that exceptional human beings could achieve things that had previously been considered impossible. But for Elena, standing on that range in the afternoon sun, the achievement felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun in a dusty border town with a father who taught her to observe and a promise she had made at his grave. She thought about the men who had killed her father and wondered if any of them were still alive to hear about the reputation she had built. She thought about her mother, still living in San Miguel, who would probably never know the full extent of what her daughter had accomplished. Most of all, Elena thought about the soldiers she had trained and the lives she had saved through her actions. The record she had just set was impressive, but it was the human impact of her work that gave it real meaning. As the other participants congratulated her and instructors began discussing the implications of her performance, Elena felt a sense of completion that had eluded her throughout her military career. She had proven herself beyond any possible doubt, establishing capabilities that would be remembered long after she left active service. But Elena Vasquez was far from finished. Her record-breaking performance had attracted attention from the highest levels of military command, opening doors to opportunities and challenges that would test every skill she had developed. The legend of La Sombra would continue to grow, but now it was grounded in documented achievement that no one could question or dismiss. Elena had earned her place among the greatest snipers in military history, and she was just getting started.